can I ask you to briefly, introduce yourselves for the record, please. Name, rank and serial number, starting on my left.
Bryn Ward, Managing Director, UK Customs Solutions.
Thank you.
Richard Wade, a customs consultant. I'm representing ACETA.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Briefly, can you each tell us about your organisation and the roles your members and customers play in importing and exporting goods?
So we're a customs clearance broker dealing in all aspects of import and export compliance, customs documentation, and that, we have multinationals, manufacturers, food importers, exporters, and we're 40 strong based on one location in Felixstowe, doing around about 3,000 declarations for our big customers a month, and that's so 3,000 moves a month for our big customers.
Thank you. Mr. Wade.
ACETA is a trade organisation. It's originally conceived in the early 70s as a forum for discussions with customs on implementation and running of automated customs clearance systems for import and export. From the beginning, it's evolved to become one of the leading practical trade associations. The membership is very broad, including importers, exporters, service providers, software houses, logistics companies, and consultancies.
Thank you very much. Now, maybe a $6 million question coming up here, but can you summarise the various options of the Brexit negotiations? And I'm probably thinking primarily of the no-deal scenario, which will be out at the end of March next year, so about 5 months away. A transition, which I presume is a continuation of the current, but not as a member of the European Union. And we'll go at the moment for the 21-month transition, rather than the 200 to 300 year scenario, if we just go for the 21 months. And then the possible of post-transition, which again should be out of the customs union and the single market, given what the governing party are talking about. How you see those three outcomes affecting your members?
Well, I think at the moment it's knowing what is going to be, and so people can prepare is the key. Certainly for all my customers.
Is it worth preparing for anything at the moment?
Pardon?
Is it worth preparing for anything at the moment?
It's hard to prepare for anything because you can't cover all bases, and there's a financial impact on trying to increase your staff. So as UK Customs Solutions have recently employed, sent out letters last week for an additional 5 staff who we're going to employ at a low level. We're going to bring in as admin staff and train up, fearing the worst, sort of prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Which is the worst in your view then?
Well, a soft Brexit to us means a harder Brexit, because there's more work to do, because if you've got deals in with the EU, it means we have additional certification to raise on all export cargo out of the UK. So EUR1s, ATR1s may be to prove the origin of the goods so that they can claim the free rate of duty in France, Germany, Spain.
So a hard Brexit would be easier from your point of view?
It'd be neither is easy, because obviously we're talking potentially some of the details that I've read, 4 times as much cargo moving than within Europe as there is between the UK and the rest of the world. So whatever happens, there'll be some sort of a border, we assume, and there'll be some sort of declaration that needs to be completed. My business and other businesses in our sector will be concerned about how they cope with that additional paperwork, the additional people. The sector is already low on trained entry clerks.
So if it's a hard Brexit, that'll be March 2019. If it's a soft Brexit, that could be December 2021. And the period in between, if there is a transition, that should be fairly straightforward. Am I right in thinking it should be a continuation of today?
Maybe.
Maybe.
The trick is you've got to look after your existing customers first, and there's going to be so much extra business to come in that it will be look, we've got enough now. I can't get in. I can't take any more business. There will become a break point where you can't expand, because these are going to be potentially simplified declarations, which means you can't. The market will the industry will not let you bill an extortionate amount for these things. They're going to be fairly cheap potentially to do these entries.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Wade, what are your own views on these three scenarios, given what you've just heard?
Just to pick up on some of those points, I mean, I agree that a hard Brexit would be, in many respects, easier to manage. Yep. And what I don't think is probably generally realised is that there's a sort of balancing act between trade with Europe and trade with the rest of the world. If you make trade with Europe easier, it makes trade with the rest of the world more difficult, and vice versa.
Explain that.
Well, if you've got things like, I don't know, it's something that's on the agenda, the common rule book for goods. If you make the common rule book within Europe too restrictive, then it penalises trade with the rest of the world. Similarly, if you've got all the origin criteria that could creep into EU trade, if you make that easier in terms of access to the markets, but then you've got to prove that there's duties paid, that it meets the origin criteria if it was produced in the UK. Mm-hmm. So I totally agree with Bryn that from a practical point of view, in many a clearance movement perspective, a hard Brexit is in some respects easier. It's not what obviously some elements of trade want, and that's really a political debate, I think, to establish where along that balancing act between European trade and rest of the world trade we want to sit.
So for the bureaucratic dealing of trade and for the paperwork around it, it's easier if it's hard.
It's clear, yes.
Yeah, although the traders themselves might complain, for those who are dealing with it, it is easier for you, although it might be harder for the traders themselves. Is that?
I think that's a fair comment. Yeah.
Okay.
So it is very definitely a balance, though, and that it's where along that balance, where you put the pivot for that balance, really, that is significant.
Thank you for that. Ranjay Warner, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Could I just get a little bit more detail on some of the processes that are already in place? Because I think this is something that a lot of folk aren't aware of, that in terms of our relationship with non-EU countries to date, we already have systems in place for particularly containerised ports to make sure that goods are tracked and we know what's available, what's in each container and so on, so that declarations are made quite easily compared to the scarce stories that we do here that could result from a disorganised roll-on, roll-off port like Dover. They're very, very different scenarios. Could you just expand, either of you, on the systems that are in place already at containerised ports for non-EU products?
So, there are systems there, but I suppose that the systems are down to the individual company systems. So if you have a booking and you book with a global forwarder in Thailand and that, then they'll put that on their system, and then the company in their wing or their agent in the UK will see that information. But not everyone ships in that manner. Depend on the eco terms of the shipment and whether it's ex-works or DDP or DDU. So you may have a company booking a shipment out of Thailand to come to here as an import, and they're booking it all the way through. The only thing they're not doing is the customs entry. Potentially the importer's agent will only find out about it the day it arrives, or sometimes after the day it's arrived. And so there's no visibility in a lot of the cargo that moves. There are systems out there. There are systems that are very good systems, but there's not one system fits all. They're individual privately owned systems within the sector. And if you're going with a supply chain management, a supply chain operator, one of the big companies, then they would obviously forward that information through to their UK offices and that. But even then, that fails.
And yet, the proportion of trade with non-EU countries is growing. So clearly, it is totally possible to do business with non-EU countries today.
Most definitely.
Yes. And so, in that respect, in terms of improving these systems, which could in the future be applicable not only to non-EU countries but also to EU countries, What assessment have you made of the possibility and the likelihood of success for trusted trader schemes to, again, streamline the approach for certain folk that, particularly for roll-on, roll-off ports and operations, would massively improve the ability to get that throughput?
So potentially there's something there, but my company is AEO accredited and we're also CFSP approved. So we use our CFSP approval to simplify entries anyway for certain customers into the country, and then make a declaration towards the end of the month to declare all the goods that arrive during that month. That system works brilliantly. Okay, but the thing is AEO, and AEO is the big one obviously, but there's not enough people that are currently signed up to it within this country, whether they be agents or importers or exporters, I don't think. And I think that the benefits to people that are AEO accredited are very minimal at this time. It's advertised as a globally recognised. Sorry, yeah.
So on that point, and
yeah.
so, and then I'm conscious that lots of other members have lots of questions. So I'm trying to get you off the fence. What I want to know is how can we improve things in terms of, say, the authorised economic operators. You say there's little benefit at the moment. So what needs to happen for that to provide clear benefits to business?
It needs to be serious benefits. So there's some notes on the customs website, and it says.
But no, can you tell us here?
It says on there that people that potentially don't have AEO accreditation will be dealt with as a secondary.
No, that wasn't the question. The question is, so you said there are a few benefits to being AEO. So what are the things you need to streamline processes for business to make sure that our throughput of goods from non-EU or EU going forward is streamlined?
It's not what I need. It's not. The industry that we're in is a reactive industry. The customer will send us the documents, we react to those documents, so we'll react to any pressure. If you have something like AEO, you need to set out, your cargo will move easily through the ports, and then we will authorise you to make declarations, as they go through the ports or just after they've gone through the ports, like CFSP, which is already out there, and what have you, to make it attractive to agents like myself to then be there and sort of drive the AEO system forward. It means that potentially you'll be able to mitigate sort of additional customs staff and what have you, because checks can happen afterwards. But it's a really complex question, really, to be honest with you. One that I need a long time to talk about, really.
Perhaps you'd write to us. Thank you.
Yeah. Chris Leslie.
Yes, so I don't know if you've seen this National Audit Office report that's out this morning about UK border preparedness. It was widely reported in the media today. One of the key things is this, the report talks about outside the customs union, we might go from handling 55 million customs declarations a year to 260 million customs declarations a year. Now, you guys are sort of in the business of that sort of paperwork. That's your thing. The NAO also say it could mean somewhere between 145,000 traders and 250,000 traders making customs declarations for the first time. Just give us a sense of the scale of potentially for your sector. That is a pretty big change.
Huge.
How big? How big? Of a factor of, is it an increase of 20%, 30% or more? Doubling?
It depends on the nature of the declaration that needs to be completed. It's all well and good telling you how many declarations you've got, but we have a full declaration which may take an experienced member of my team 10 to 15 minutes to complete. A simplified one takes 2 minutes. And that, if it's like the old C2 status and what have you, where there's some stuff done by the shipping line to manifest it as certain type of cargo so that IT solutions can be implemented, then it's a case of 30 seconds. So it's relevant to, once the rules are out there.
In terms of the volume of the potential customers and the volume of potential transactions,
my business would get swallowed up very quickly, and we'd close the doors to what we've got, and we're just
physical capacity of your business.
Yeah, you just can't. But
I think I should buy shares in customs customs operations activities.
Well, the thing is
few people to benefit from this process.
Yeah, the feel is that if you don't have an IT solution, you can't employ that many people and make money on a commercial venture clearing simplified entries, because they won't be able to transmit enough per person per day.
Yeah, just quick.
In my opinion, the key to this is to have it's not handle movements on a transaction by transaction basis, but it has to be a periodic return of some sort. I mean, we do it with VAT and have done for a long time. In my opinion, there's no reason why it shouldn't be done with the customs duties as well, because in real terms, the actual values involved are far less.
So at the same time as all this, we're moving from the chief system, customs handling of import and export freight, to CDS, this new whiz-bang HMRC, supposedly wonderful customs declaration service. But the National Audit Office have got it flagged up here as amber red. And they say today that of all the 12 big infrastructure things that could affect our border, CDS sort of finds its way into about 7 out of those 12, because they talk about a multiplication effect. If CDS is at risk, it could bring down the traces thing, which is to do with animal movements, trade control and export system, a lot of these other things. So are you happy with, from your observations, how HMRC are moving smoothly into this, and have they got contingencies right?
Obviously it is totally unproven. We're reliant on what we're being told. We've seen no evidence whether it will be able to cope or not.
Right. So
Go on,
I think we'd be stupid to hold our breath on that one.
Yeah.
We've volunteered to be a test location for the new system. Mm-hmm. The system's not ready. I've got a list here which I'll happily send to you afterwards, which is from my compliance manager and my IT team, telling you about the problems with CDS at the moment.
I'd be very grateful if you would send that in, because paragraph 3.7 of the NAO report on page 31 talks about, well, if CDS isn't up and running, there's a number of contingencies. They can try and keep the existing system going as a contingency. They can take the risk at the border as a contingency. That doesn't sound like a contingency to me. Or they can revert to paper-based systems, it says
yes, and so we were just talking about this outside while we were waiting. I'm ready with my staff to handwrite entries just in case, because Chief won't cope.
On a paper basis?
Yeah, that's it, yeah. So Chief, the current system, we're
so
led
we
to
could
believe
be
won't
at the
cope.
same time as going up to that massive volume, potentially 250,000 extra transactions, at the same time we could be having to fall back on paper basis.
Potentially, and all of Richard's members and certainly my customers, all they care about is the delays, because the manufacturers that I represent and what have you, if they have delays on the port and their manufacturing has to stop for an hour, they're talking of tens of thousands of pounds per hour.
And as we're policymakers here, right, this is your chance to tell us, because we're ahead of this happening, how worried should we be about this?
Very.
Right.
Over everything else you're talking about, in my opinion.
That was in unison.
It would bring the country to a grinding halt.
It would.
If that's
because I would have to handwrite my entries. So where one person may do 40 entries in a day, that person will only be able to do 8 entries a day. And then we're going to have to courier those entries under what's called a phase 1. I won't bore you with the technicalities, to Salford in Manchester, in order to get it, because we haven't got a local customs office. We have got an office there, but there's not staff there anymore to cope with this sort of thing. So cargo will stop. Cargo won't move, and you'll end up having a bottleneck at all ports.
Right. So just to clarify, where the Audit Office call this a critical system, you say that it'll bring the country to a halt?
Most definitely. To
CDS
me, it's
system?
the most important thing.
Okay. That's pretty clear. I mean, the only other adjunct was when it links across to traces, this animal products, meat export stuff. Yeah. The NAO report also says that, of course, there aren't inspection posts, I think, for these things in the channel arrangements, or even, of course, the Irish border.
I believe Tilbury covers Dover at the moment, and I believe it's a 4-man team at Tilbury.
So we haven't got those inspection posts at the main channel areas or in the Irish border. So if traces is brought down, as well as those arrangements, we'd have to route animal product exports, meat exports, Where?
Potentially,
How?
but are the policies on traces with DEFRA, are they going to change? Because if they change, then you could have. But if they're the same, then the system can be done remotely anyway. It's about physical examination at the port. That's the problem with traces. Traces itself is a system that shadows chief at the moment,
Right.
and so you put in a CVED, which is a vet check, and you put that into the system. When you then do your entry, and the vets have released that out of traces, it links to the current entry, and then that entry clears. So until traces is cleared by the vet, the main entry will not clear. So that won't change. It's getting the vets to release that traces thing at Dover, because at the moment, currently, they don't have to inspect that meat that comes into Dover, is my understanding.
Are there vets at Dover at the moment? Is there space for vets at Dover?
No idea. My understanding is that it's currently controlled by Tilbury, but again, we deal with a lot of chicken, and that it comes into Felixstowe or Liverpool, what have you. So I would be able to find that out and come back to you on that.
Thank you. Catherine West, do you want to come in?
Just on the point of everything grinding to a halt,
Yeah.
obviously, who sort of decides the priority? Because in the end, we have to have medicines for people, we have to have certain foodstuffs, otherwise we'll have some serious problems.
I understand someone has actually made the decisions that initially the priority should be that materials do keep moving at the expense of compliance. That has
Because
been
obviously,
mentioned.
you know, a raffeta skirt from Thailand can sit in a ship and wait
Yeah.
if we need to have, you know, fresh products in order to stock our supermarkets. So
A
that's
lorry
the-
load of beef or something like that.
But what I'm trying to understand is who's the decision maker in terms of
It depends, because you're going to have
prioritising.
lots of different agents doing lots of different products. So, for instance, I instruct my guys, we import everything from engines right the way through to frozen chicken. And so we prioritise frozen foodstuffs first, because the shelf life, and then after that would be hazardous goods, because they're not allowed to sit on the terminal. So we bring in fireworks, for instance, so they have to move, and then everything else after that. But that would be ultimately the entries would for foodstuffs often go what's called Route 1, which is a customs checking of documents. So that would go to Salford. So ultimately, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs at Salford will be making those decisions, not your traders, not your agents, because they will have to physically clear them. So some sort of system where there was another inbox for perishable goods or something like that would probably help them out.
That could also involve other government agencies.
It could, yeah, most definitely.
Would
You know, I could imagine a sort of a Cobra-style meeting having to be convened to make sure that we have enough food on the table, enough medicines, vaccinations. It only takes, you know, a really bad flu outbreak, and then, because that's all freshly prepared, all those vaccinations have a shelf life as well.
It honestly depends on, like you said, the other agencies. I think is more relevant than customs and what have you. Here is how many checks European foods that are coming into this country are going to need to go through with the vets or the Forestry Commission at the port of Dover, mainly Dover. I know it's about 80% of all of the stuff that comes in on wheels. So and that's going to be where your hold-up's going to be, not with customs so much. We can still process them, even if we have to handwrite them, we'll still process them within 24 hours via a courier service with Salford. It's the physical checks that may have to be carried out depending on the border inspection criteria they have to follow following Brexit.
Because at the moment, how many vets are employed at Felixstowe?
Felixstowe, I'm not sure how many there, but they're 24 hours a day, and there's always 2 to 3 vets on all of the time, and then they'll have a team around them, so they can have a team. My understanding is they would go, send a team member, do the inspection, maybe sample the goods, and the vets are the ones that have to sign off on them, so they don't actually physically have to check everything themselves. But I think you'll probably find there's 8 or 10 vets based at Felixstowe, and if those figures that you're reading out, on that basis you need 20 to 30 vets potentially at Dover if you're going to run the same checks.
Thanks, Chair.
Just quickly before I bring in Mark Weston, you mentioned, Catherine West mentioned food and medicines there. From Toyota, we know they get about 50 lorries a day with a 4-hour waiting system. From Honda, it's about 350 lorries a day crossing the channel. I'm not sure whether it's a 4-hour lag they've got as well. But food and medicines, the Financial Times today are worrying about those. It might even affect the Beaujolais Nouveau for those in the Lords or whatever. But on food and medicines alone, How many lorries a day are we talking about moving cross-channel?
I might just stick a pin in the map. I don't know. I know that we've got one customer that brings in 13 fresh lorries a day of chicken a day that they bring in, and they're a reasonably big player. But when you're talking about your oranges and your tomatoes and stuff like that, they could be huge numbers in season as well. But I've no idea of an actual figure.
No idea.
Is that discoverable at the moment? I mean, the Honda figure and the Toyota figure are just from the companies.
Yeah, that's it. Well, talking to the big food importers, it's going to be the big food manufacturers and the fresh produce. I think the fresh produce is going to be massive.
When you say massive, bigger than Honda and Toyota?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, easy.
Easy. By multiple times bigger.
Yeah. Twice easy, I would say.
Feeding the nation is more important than cars.
Than feeding cars. Yeah. Catherine West makes a very good point.
Yeah. I think that maybe speaking to the guys that arrange the ferry crossings, your Norfolk Lines, your Channel, those guys will have manifests of what they're bringing over. They should have an idea of how many of the trucks are chilled and refrigerated, which pretty much guarantees they're going to be pharmaceuticals or foodstuffs.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I should take in Matt Weston. Thanks for your patience, Matt.
Just related to this, that in the NAO report, and it was suggested on the news today about yesterday's cabinet meeting, where there is discussion about ships being chartered by the government to ensure that food supplies are assured and so on. Is the government kind of slightly misplaced in its priority? Because what you're talking about is essentially a bottleneck. It doesn't matter how many ships you have out there, loaded with food or whatever, you've got to get it into the country through these points.
Assuming they'll be moving the same volumes of physical goods, it's the clearance and entry and getting them into the country that's going to be the bottleneck.
What would you be telling government at the cabinet table? Not charter more ships. What would you be saying?
I'd be saying look at the border process that they're going to have to create at Dover, because it just really doesn't exist at the moment. It hasn't existed for the last 40 years. And something will have to be done to ensure that the freight does keep moving, and things that are going to have to be checked on at entry, at the time of entry, are going to be the critical ones. The things like the cars, that can be done. That's really only a fiscal issue, and that can be done after the event on a periodic basis.
And obviously with the cars, they can almost order twice one day and then give themselves a 24-hour window, because they've got but you can't do that with food because of the shelf life. It's almost like you want to open up a green lane or something at Dover for foodstuffs and pharmaceuticals and that, so that they come in and they get dealt with as a priority, because you've got two elements. Pardon?
Without checks then?
No, well,
green lane.
Potentially, again, going on one of the earlier questions, if you had people AO accredited and authorised and maybe using systems like CFSP, then obviously, yeah. But ultimately, if you have a lane there, because we can do the declaration, but because it's such fast-moving cargo from Europe, it might be that we have to wait for a ship's bag, so the lorry brings the docs with them. Now, normally in this day and age, they'd be sent over to you, but sometimes you need the originals. You might need the original health certs and everything in order to process them. We can process them, but if that lorry's 101 in the queue, he's not going to get to his check until the other 100 are done. So there's potentially a delay there, no matter what you do with the paperwork. But I think it's advisable to have people go to Dover and see how the thing runs at the moment, and or maybe speak to some of the big Dover agents and see what they think, because they live this every day.
Yes, sure.
Thank you very much. Emma Little-Pengelly, you want to come in?
I just wanted to clarify. So at the moment, goods coming from mainland EU coming in, no checks really at all, because we know what their standards are. There's no issue about the collection of customs duties, etc. So week one after Brexit, we know that effectively there is a common rule book. So their standards are going to be exactly the same as ours. So I suppose the question is, what, in terms of the anticipation, what would you be checking for? Because unless there's divergence in mainland EU or divergence here, we're actually going to be just taking the same food at the same quality, the same medicines with the same certifications. So from a pragmatic point of view, why would the government or the EU require checks?
Yeah, that would be a policy decision. That would be, yeah, that would be. To be fair, it's logical, exactly what you've said, yeah. But we would just need, I suppose, the only check that we'd need is to prove that it was coming from where it was. You know?
Because at the minute there's no checks, so we have to rely on, if EU countries are shipping to here, there's no checks at all, so we're relying on other countries to say it's of the right standard, it's got the right certifications, it's fresh, it's not dangerous, and we do that at the moment. And given the relationship, given we know that the standards are the same, we will be aware if there is divergence, because that will have to go through Parliament here or have to go through the European Union. So I'm just wondering that, yes, if there was a requirement for checks, but I think it comes down to what are we checking for? And if it is about the collection of customs, for example, presumably that is something that the government could waive initially, because that is if there was going to be an issue about food or medicine.
I think that goes back to one of the points I was trying to make earlier, that if we make it easy for EU trade, then we make it more difficult for non-EU trade. For that, and that is one of the reasons there, that if you assume that EU trade is as it has always been, or has been for the last 40 years, whatever it is. And they are the EU, we are no longer part of the single market, then it's given, you get into the trade situation there where we're not, it's not the same trading relationship.
Mm-hmm. But we would be able to, presumably post-Brexit, we will still have confidence that foods, medicines within the European Union, coming out of the European Union, can be trusted.
In the short term, I would say,
Yeah.
I would agree.
And I'm sure the European Union would argue in the long term, because they will keep their standards and certification relatively high.
Open border to the European Union for foodstuffs and medicines, that's the argument.
Yeah, I'm just saying, what are we checking for? So tomatoes coming from Spain are going to be just the same quality, presumably, as
currently with food imports from anywhere in the world outside of Europe and that, there's DEFRA set the rules, and Port Health enforce those rules.
So DEFRA could drop the food rules for food across the world then?
Yeah, because they govern the whole of Europe, yeah, so there's no problem. So if you're staying within that DEFRA control, then there should be nothing with regards to the checks on foodstuffs. Whether you've got a border for customs processes, they are two completely different things. Then all that would have to be written into the customs system is a way to override, so it doesn't look for the traces system, which you brought up, so that you can switch that off on European stuff.
Because just very briefly, because for example on the Irish border at the moment, there's excise duty differentials. So alcohol, cigarettes, fuel, and there's a decision made by the government that the balance of risk between putting somebody there to make sure that that's being paid is not outweighed by not having infrastructure on the border. So that is an example where, similar presumably to customs, the government makes a decision about what they're willing to put in terms of checks and barriers in order to collect.
That's currently.
So there's excise duty differentials either side of the Irish border.
But that's
there's
not all
fiscal
borders across Europe. The same.
Yeah, well, I presume so. But some countries will decide to have more infrastructure to ensure maximising the intake to the Treasury due to those customs and different. So on the customs issue, that is a political call, what risk that the UK government wants to take. But I think the key thing here is that the goods coming, foods and medicines coming with the same certification from what the European Union might argue is a higher standard into, even if we diverge, a different standard. Some may say lower standard. I don't think that's going to happen. But that is an issue about risk as well, and I just don't see where the risk is, certainly in the initial period.
No, I suppose with the quality as well, the companies that are importing the goods from Europe, if they're not good, they're going to be rejecting the cargo anyway, you know. So I think you're 100% right. But again, the DEFRA, if the DEFRA banner is still going to control our Port Health and what those rules and regulations are, then there shouldn't be any additional checks at Dover for foodstuffs, which means that you're back to your original thing, which is the bottleneck of all the cargo coming in, and then a green lane or something like that would potentially suffice us to speed these things through. Still have the entry to do, but a simplified entry, you know. So at the moment, cargo moves on the T2.
But that's only 50% of the lorry's movement, of course. The lorry's going to go back the other direction, and we have to wonder what current European partners might
But
do.
again, you would assume that if we're all under the DEFRA banner, that they would be following the same things regarding to checking the quality of the meat and everything that's coming out of here. They
So
wouldn't need to check those.
If we stay in a common rule book, it's a lot easier.
Say again?
If we stay in a common rule book with Europe, it's a lot easier. For
Yeah,
them.
with DEFRA,
Yeah.
as far as DEFRA is concerned, because it's a different level. We have food standards across Europe that are set out by DEFRA, and I think that, you know, that's a completely different discussion from here. What you could have is, even if you separate, they could have one rule for the rest of Europe, and then we could agree exactly the same rules here as a separate entity with DEFRA, and the stuff can still move.
So we'd follow European rules.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Faisal Rashid, sorry, we're very patient.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just quickly, so what is the message is coming from the government in terms of preparedness for your sector? So whether to,
it's straightforward. We're guessing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's no message, clear message.
There's no clear message. The only message coming out is prepare for the worst.
For problems.
And that's what some people are doing as far as they can, but we don't really know what the worst is in that respect, or when it's going to happen. More to the point, and that's where the transition.
We go to every single
kicks
meeting, every single seminar with the Manchester Revenue and Customs, with the software providers, with the government, with CETA and BIFO and everything like that, and we'll get told different things by the same people at different meetings on occasion. Now that may be because things have developed from meeting 1 to meeting 2, but the message that we're getting from a lot of these officers is we just don't know, and if they don't know, we haven't got hope of knowing.
And we've got only 4 months to go.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then with the news and everything, it depends on the channel or the newspaper that's reporting it, which message they want to send to you.
Catherine West, briefly
Very
before
quickly on that
Faisal
point,
continues. Yeah, on that
because
point.
one of our members has asked, what are we looking for? Well, one of the worries that I have is that because there will be an element of uncertainty, regardless of what happens, even if it runs beautifully, there are organised criminals who try and get through your system every single day, be that cyber, be that walking things through. I want to know what is in place to stop illegal guns coming in, arms, drugs, because presumably while you're busy worrying about the fresh mozzarella coming through so that we can have all the pizzas that we need, some other guy who knows that you're going to be a little bit at 6s and 7s is going to come in with guns, drugs or whatever and be opportunistic.
I don't see why that should be any worse in 6 months' time than it is now, because customs don't actually get. They get a certain amount of information in terms of intelligence, but they don't get the detail of what is on each individual movement.
So you think that there will be just as many checks about smuggling?
Well, obviously you can have less officers, but a lot of the checks that run now are automated checks by the system.
Yeah.
So the system will target certain products, certain countries, certain imports, and what have you, and then customs will go and examine those. But certainly talking about my business and everything, the staff that are highly trained, and they are trained to look at stuff and go, hang on a minute, we've got X amount of litres of whatever in this container, it doesn't weigh the right amount, and then we report it to Manchester Revenue and Customs Intel and what have you. But it's going to be exactly the same as it runs now with the rest of the world, and that, as long as you've got enough customs officers to support that.
There is a certain amount of intelligence used on intra-community traffic as well, traffic coming to and from the EU. So there are some checks done, but not as they don't have the same amount of data for community traffic as they do for rest of the world traffic, because there is no need for customs
in the big
entry.
Heathrow sting, which you'd be aware of, that was actually lined up with some subcontractors who basically were dishonest essentially.
Yeah.
But so my question is really, wouldn't this be a perfect time
It
in the
could
spring
do,
of
but
next year to sort of get through all the drugs, all the guns, which actually
Could be,
end up
but
in our constituencies, by the way.
AEO potentially becomes a weapon for you, a defence against that. because if you've got two elements, AEOC, which is for customs, and AEOS, which is mainly for your manufacturers and everything. But if you add that element into the AEO accreditation and you make the agents more responsible for additional checks in order to get AEO, as long as the benefits are there for the agents once they've got AEO, then you're basically going to train up another load of people across the sector that are going to be additional eyes for you.
You're saying you're guessing that. Perhaps to help your guess at the moment, Guy Verhofstadt from the European Parliament has tweeted in the last hour that progress in the negotiations can be 90%, 95% or even 99%, but as long as there's no solution on the Irish border or the Good Friday Agreement is not fully secured, for us in our Parliament, progress is 0%. So you can factor that into your guessing game as time goes on. Faisal Rashid.
So can you briefly explain what is the role of customs brokers in relation to trade with EU and non-EU countries?
So once you've set your policies, we're there to make sure that the cargo moves as smoothly as possible in and out of the UK by completing the documentation and educating our customers, I suppose, in what they need to do and setting up processes with them.
Yeah, I would say the role of the broker for EU traffic is zero in terms of at the moment, and so going forward when if depending on what relationship we end up with the EU, they'll take the responsibility for most companies for their customs activities.
So currently I have one customer and we deal with about 2,000 European exports for them a month, but all we do is raise a shipping note and manage the visibility on a log for them. Obviously after Brexit, potentially I then need to do documentation and everything for them, but like Richard rightly says, I do this bit and then it moves. I don't get involved in the movement. It's in Europe, there's no border, there's nothing, so literally currently we do nothing at all. We don't have to do anything, we're not required to, but depending on your policy and after Brexit, we'll have a lot to do.
I'm guessing at the moment, absolutely right. So, Mr. Watt, you said recently that the customs brokerage sector might not have enough sufficient trained staff to meet demand in the event of a no-deal scenario. Okay?
Yep.
Yeah, and what would be the implications of this? Obviously, you said it will be, halt, but you also said the hard Brexit may be slightly better than the soft Brexit.
Yeah. So to be fair, that was with the Times, wasn't it? Yeah. Either way, if there's a border that goes up between us and the rest of Europe, then there are already not enough trained staff. I was hearing from a big supply chain operator, and they're telling me they need 600 additional trained staff if they're going to have to do entries on all the European stuff. I would struggle to find 6 in Felixstowe, let alone 600, and Felixstowe is the biggest port that we have. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to invest in the staff that we've already got, to bring them up to the highest possible standard, and then employ admin staff to then take off the admin tasks so that my guys can do what they're doing. But if they're all of a sudden the figures that were mentioned earlier, if you have to do an entry on all of those in and out, there's not enough people across all of the agents to do it.
But that's the forecast, isn't it?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I mean, it's quite scary if you look at, it's like 4 or 5 times more than what you are actually managing now.
And that's where a transition period of some sort is essential, regardless of what comes out of the negotiations.
But the transitional period would be if there is a deal. So if it's a hard Brexit, no deal, 29th March, then what?
Fun and games, yeah.
Well, regardless, it would be very, very difficult.
Okay,
to just have a cliff edge where everything changes.
Yeah. So the government are obviously saying to you that to the industry that prepare for a worst case scenario, which is hard Brexit.
Yeah.
Are you preparing for it?
I'm prepared to cover all my current customers, everything that they need. Yeah.
Right. Not the forecast.
Yeah. And that's the truth. And depending on what sort of declaration needs to be made, I'll know whether I can take on any more or whether I'd have to plan. And what Richard said is vital, really. If you said to me today, that's it, you've got to start doing an entry for everything that's going in and out of Europe as of Monday, my guys would be doing a lot of hours, but we'd get through it. But then you're going to have a lot of people that currently European truck operators, they don't know how to do an entry. They'll just be turning up at Dover, no documents, no nothing. You're going to have a massive load of trucks that can't come in because they haven't got the right documents, or can't go out because they haven't got the right documents, and it's gonna bottle up here really bad. So without a transitional period, you're asking for trouble, you know. So knowing as soon as possible is key. But
and the other part of that, it really is that you need to think in terms of a periodic entry process, so you are not doing it on a transaction basis for every parcel that moves across the channel. It needs to be on a monthly basis, or even 3 monthly basis.
So do you not have that system where, you know, the lorry is coming, but with the registration number, so you already got all the information beforehand that this lorry is coming, it's got this is registration number, this is what the goods are, you know, in that lorry, and then this is all.
There's not one all comes in.
So we don't have anything like that.
There's no legal obligation to do that at the moment for community traffic.
So you may have a ferry arriving every 14 minutes into Dover, and each one of those ferries would have a manifest saying what it had on there, but it will only have the vehicle registers. It won't it doesn't currently have what's on those trucks. So there'd be additional work, additional staff required for them in order to do that. One of the, you know, and I'm not suggesting that this is the way to go, but the other thing, they can't cross the channel until they've got the documents that they're right. Otherwise, you're going to have a bottleneck here in the UK. And what have you. You could simplify, I suppose, you could simplify imports by saying we'll have a period where we'll let imports come in without an entry, but with regards to the export entries, you're going to be in the hands of Europe and what they want.
Thank you. Just briefly before I go to Mark Hendrick and then to Julia Lopez, short word from me, short word from Mark. You mentioned the number of customers you currently have.
Yeah.
How many potential other customers are out there that might want to be your customer?
It's in loads, hundreds, thousands.
Versus the number you've got at the moment times most.
I'm a small, in the biggest scheme of things, I'm a small operator, you know, in as much as we specialise in one area, and I do, you know, there are companies out there that are doing 100,000 declarations a week, you know, you know, I'd be 1% or less or whatever of the market, I suppose. I don't know. I don't know the figure. I'd be guessing the figure, but there's loads and loads and loads of work out there.
It's a very open question.
I was just going to say there's a lot of companies that are trading with Europe that currently have no involvement with customs activities at all, and it might be one person shipping one small box a week, or it might be someone shipping 100 trailers a day. So there is a massive difference between the large traders and the small one-man bands that are dealing with Europe.
Could wipe one-man bands potentially.
Sorry?
This could wipe out one-man bands.
Potentially, yeah. It becomes less attractive for them to trade with Europe if they've got the overheads of having to do customs entries.
Thank you. Mark Hendrick, sorry. And then Julia, if you can keep it brief.
Yeah, I'll try this. I mean, it seems to me that you're both saying something slightly contradictory in the sense that, obviously you said yourself, Mr. Ward, that you're a reactive industry, and therefore, obviously, you're not setting policies, you're responding to what's happening in the real world. You said you prefer a transitional period, but on the other hand, you're saying, well, actually, a no-deal Brexit suits us better because then things are clearer. Well, the problem is, a no-deal Brexit will take place on March the 29th, and that's it. It's the big bang. And you can either deal with it or you can't. Now, from the National Audit Office report, it's clear that the scale of it is such that you're predicting, both of you are predicting, that it's going to be a disaster. The only way you're actually going to get a transitional period is if there is some sort of a deal.
Yeah.
And, you know, obviously you'll get however long afterwards to try and sort things out. But in the meantime, let's say there is a deal, surely it's better to have a soft Brexit, some sort of a deal, and it gives you time to sort things out, rather than the big bang that you're going to get on March the 29th next year.
Yeah, most definitely. Just to clarify one point there, when I said a reactive business, what I mean by that is that I have customers that send me the documents 28 days before they arrive. I have customers that send me on the day they arrive. There's no seasonal stuff. It depends on when the vessels arrive and that. So we might have a quiet Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then we might be working all night on Thursday and Friday. That's what I mean with us being reactive. With regards to soft Brexit deals, yeah, that will be more work for us. But the thing is for me, it's just about knowing. So we are making allowances now as much as we can for a no-deal Brexit, and that by employing new people now and training new people now, and that's so that we're able to cope with our customers and hopefully a few more and everything. And I'm assuming there are lots of other companies out there like me that are doing the same as well. But it's how much resource and financial money, risk they will put into this, and then put all this in and then something happens and there's no entries to do, and then you've got a load of staff that you now don't need anymore. Now potentially we will need them, whatever happens.
At some stage.
At some stage,
but you don't know when.
It might be another year down the line, and then you've got potentially people sitting around waiting for this to happen. Yeah. So we did some figures, and we thought that we could probably employ about 10 to 12 staff. We've gone for 5 now with an additional 2 in January. That's where we've gone. So we've tried to balance out our risk to making sure we've got the right level of service for our customers.
Do you want to come in, I think, do you? Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was going to say about the reference to deal, no deal, and the transition. I think what we're both saying is that even if there is essentially no
even
trade
if there's no
deal,
you want a transition.
If there is no deal, we still need a transition deal, if you like.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
So that's what hard Brexit is.
Julia Lopez?
Yeah.
There's been lots of discussion about how to ease post-Brexit trade friction at borders, how do we have fewer physical checks, and some people have advocated blockchain and trusted trader schemes, other kinds of technology, artificial intelligence. To what extent do you think that there are solutions there you could buy into?
There have been solutions that have been trialled over the last 20 years that have had various measures of success. Most of them have been reasonably successful, but they haven't been implemented because there's been no appetite to spend the money on those solutions. So there are undoubtedly technical solutions that could help. Whether they'd solve all the problems miraculously, I doubt, but they can certainly make massive improvements.
Why do you think there hasn't been that appetite?
I don't think the return on the investment hasn't been there. But that's something which probably would change now. Because the volumes will be so massive.
I think there's a lot to be said for the trusted trader schemes, but they need to have benefits for the agents, but more so for the customers themselves. They need to, if you had trusted traders schemes where they actually meant that they had fewer checks across the border, you minimise the bottleneck, you would get these things out, you'd be able to have more admin staff rather than highly trained custom staff doing the checks after the event and what have you. Already have a system in place, CFSP, which works brilliantly and has done for years and years and years, and lots of the big multinationals are operating CFSP. So at the moment we don't know if once Brexit's there, whether we can put European traffic onto CFSP. We've asked the CFSP team at Customs, and they don't know the answer to this. But if you can, then there's potentially a solution there for a lot of your big national companies already run CFSP for their cargo to move through with no check.
How burdensome is it for a company to become an authorised economic operator?
It's expensive.
Yes.
How expensive?
It varies depending on the size of the company, because the requirements aren't the same across the board. A large company will have to jump through a lot more hoops because there's more risk. If it's a one-man band with a small warehouse, the risk is far lower because there's less at stake.
Okay, so say I'm a one-man band with a warehouse. I want to become an authorised operator. How long does it take, and what's it likely to cost me?
Okay, so we help people, and it's almost like consultancy in that But like Rich has rightly said, multiple locations different. If you've got one and they're going to put the resource in and they've got all of their processes written down, then you potentially can get the application done very quickly, but it might take 6 months for a managed revenue customs to come back to you with anything that's wrong. You correct that. They might take another couple of months, 3 months to come back to you. Then they do site visits and then they might tell you that you need to do this and that. So when they weren't as busy, you were looking at about 12 to 18 months maybe. And now I reckon you're looking at 2 years, if not longer. But it's again.
I think AEO isn't necessarily the answer, because the AEO requirements are complex. A process of trusted traders, which could be far more simple, could be adequate to meet the needs of EU trade, I would suggest.
And the time and the cost has to be offset to the customer with the benefits of achieving whatever that is. I think that's the key. It has to be cost effective. It can't just be, because if you're like we want you all to do this and we're not really going to give you anything, but it makes our life easier, they're not going to do it.
If the government said in 5 years' time we want every business involved in import-export to be either a trusted trader or an authorised economic operator, and we're going to put in numerous, various incentives around that, and we're going to put in more staff for HMRC, do you think that's a realistic thing for them to require?
Never please all of the people all the time, but I think that's going to go a long way to maybe sort it out. And like Richard says, it may not be that AEO may not be the answer to everything. It may be that AEO manifests itself as something different after Brexit. I think that whatever you decide to do, you need to make sure that it either becomes compulsory, or you will be, you won't be able to trade, or you'll be looked at after all of these ones are done. There needs to be some significant benefit for the importers and exporters.
There could be a tax incentive, so that if you're doing it like that, then you can have a.
Most definitely. So they put the resource to it and they take it seriously as well. Because what you also don't want to do is then just going through the motions and parking it there and not really following it. And then when they get an audit 3 years later, you find out they haven't been following what they've put out there.
Well, I've seen examples where people have become AEOs, and in fact, they actually become an easy target. So in fact, the reverse actually happens in some instances. They, rather than getting preference, they're actually targeted because they're an easy target.
There's a strong disincentive at the moment, so it's up to the government to create policies where incentives are there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Most definitely.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Just before I go to Catherine West, just clarify, you mentioned bottlenecks a couple of times. Would the bottlenecks be mainly as a result of the customs declaration systems or just the physical checks at the border?
The declarations, mainly a bit of both, I suppose.
I think it depends what comes out of this. If we have some sort of periodic declaration process, then that would ease that situation, but there's still going to be a certain amount of checks being carried out, which will need to be carried out at the border.
So for instance, I don't know the figures. Let's say 10% of every entry is selected as a Route 1, which means customs have to check that entry.
Yeah.
Then obviously that's now going to be fourfold, that figure. So you're going to need 4 times as many staff to check those. So if they haven't got the staff, it's going to slow down clearances as well. There's lots of different things. My main concern, obviously, and we've touched on it, is the system. If the system is not responding quickly enough, and or worst case goes down, then there's no recovering from that in the short term other than handwriting, unless it's up within an hour. There's concern about how much traffic would build up within a short period of time if the system went down. And there's some articles we've read, how good they are, I don't know, but they suggested that a few minutes could be 27 miles of trucks.
Wow. Catherine West.
On the question of medicines, one of the concerns I have is that people will start to import their own medicines via the internet. And my question is, how many checks are there currently on the quality of what comes in the small packages?
That will all come express carriers, and I don't deal with
on the quality. None.
Yeah.
So they might, if they were licensable, then there may be checks on whether or not they've got licences, but the checks.
We don't clear any pharmaceuticals we don't do any individual small packages imports. That we do personal imports, people move in house and that sort of thing, but we don't get involved in that. You know, for those sorts of questions, again, your big T&Ts, your DHLs, those are the world's. You know, speak to them. They'll tell you what checks they have in place because that's highly specific to them, I suppose.
They do your checks. I was in the express.
Yeah, well, you know better than me. Yeah.
So,
it's just that
but the European the intra-European traffic,
we could be looking at, you know, a bit of a health crisis in terms of people self-medicating.
Yeah.
And I know that exists already. So what's different? But I'm just thinking about the scale.
The thing is we're a document business, so we rely heavily on the documents that are supplied to us. And then we're trained to look out for warning signs and that with regards to the importer and who they are, and the telephone numbers they give you and the weights and everything like that. But ultimately, without opening up the packages, you know, we have to trust what's on these pieces of paper and whether they're an invoice and you know, it's very hard. But that problem exists right now. And so that problem's still it's not going to change. It'll be exactly the
It's
same.
even worse right now because there is no need to make any sort of declaration on the materials coming in from the EU.
At the moment, I think it's, you know, a small but growing problem. Once people who are dependent on a particular drug think that there's going to be a supply problem, I could just see that getting much worse very quickly.
Mm.
To be fair, Richard might have a point, but you may have a point, and I didn't think of it this way, but now you can go to Spain, you walk into a chemist and you can buy whatever you want, and then as long as you pay for it and bring it back here. Obviously, if there's a border here, you know, you're not going to be able to do that so much, and whatever. So maybe with the border going up, it will reduce the people that are maybe already doing it in and out of Europe. I don't know. You know, there could be something to be said for that because you've got additional checks. At the moment, there's no checks. You've got a border, at least there will be some checks, and even if only 10% of them are being checked, that's 10% more than is being checked now.
Yeah, I think the difference will be that at the moment it's perfectly legitimate to move stuff without any checks. In the future, there potentially should be checks because there should be some sort of declaration. So it'll be a different situation. Whether it's good or bad, I'm not sure.
Well, that's a good point to end it there. Fascinating evidence from you both. Questions about the future left hanging. I'm reluctant to end it, but unfortunately time is against us and we've got a second panel to come up. But can I thank you both for your excellent evidence this morning. It was fascinating evidently to the committee, given the amount of requests I had from colleagues to come in and to question and to ask. I don't know if they're looking for reassurance or looking to be scared with Halloween on the horizon, but thank you both.
Lovely.